I welcome you all to BVP IEEE YouTube channel. Today we have with us Mr. Pranay Tumilapalli. He headed MIC funded robotics project, is product development intern at Trestle Labs, and he won Smart India Hackathon in 2018. He's going to speak about the topic design thinking and product design. If you have any doubts, then please comment in the chat box.
Topic of this talk is design thinking. So let me start by showing you an example. So this is a glass, and we all have this glass in our house. We use it very regularly, but there is a very fatal flaw. Not fatal, it's a very big flaw in this glass that most of us face, but matlab, we just make do with it. We don't pay much heed to it. So when you can anyone tell me what the flaw is? तो what happens is कि suppose यहाँ तक अगर ग्लास का लेवल भी है, so you can't hold it at the bottom जहाँ पे लिक्विड है, right? Because उससे हाथ जल जाएगा. हुआ है सबके साथ ये?
हाँ.
हाँ. So you can only hold it at the top जहाँ पे लिक्विड नहीं है. And उसका एक और डिसएडवांटेज ये है कि उससे ग्लास गिरने का चांस है ना? So this is a flaw in this glass. अब इसका solution क्या हो सकता है? Thinking from a purely design thinking perspective, what can the solution be? Either this is one possible solution, this is another possible solution. Agreed? So how is this a solution? अब इसमें से ऊपर से तो हम लोग कभी we've all used this glass, we've never held the glass from the top, है ना? We always use it from the stem, thin stem, and this is not hot because glass is not a very good conductor of heat. मतलब it is a conductor, but it only conducts up to a certain thickness or length. So this part is still hot, but this part is never hot. So you can use this glass to drink a hot beverage like coffee or tea, and you can also use this. This is a glass we regularly use to drink hot beverages. This glass still we used for drinking cold beverages. I don't think, मतलब used किया है maybe hot beverages के लिए, but not regularly. So I use this one. But again, both of these also have a flaw in them. This one doesn't have a technical flaw. It has more of a cultural flaw. From thinking from a purely what do you say, from a person to person perspective, because this glass is we're used to drinking martinis and champagne in this glass. So if you see a person drinking coffee in this glass, you would obviously feel a little weird, right? You know? So, and also this glass, talking about this glass, so this is a glass that we regularly use to drink tea. We've seen our parents drink tea in this, and when you use it, you must have faced this, that you put your fingers inside this gap, and the top of your fingers between the nails it's still in contact with the glass, the hot glass. So that is a potential source of burns if the liquid is very hot. So both of these glasses have a solution, but they also have design flaw. Now there is a very innovative solution to this problem. This is a glass. Can you see this glass clearly? Can you make out how they solved the problem? Can anyone tell me how they solved the problem in this? Anyone?
Basically, it is a 2-walled glass.
Yeah. So since it's 2-walled, air is a very poor conductor of heat. You know? So you can hold the inside wall is hot, but the outside wall is still relatively cold. So you can use this glass to drink hot beverages as well. All right. So moving on. So before we talk about purely design thinking perspective of product development, we need to look at the entire product development as a whole stage, because people generally get confused between product development and design thinking. So the first stage in any product development process is identifying the problem. So you have to identify what the problem is, and there are certain nuances to it. The first one being then you have to understand what's bothering the user. You have to understand what the user is actually facing. So why this might seem a little obvious, but it's not, because there are a lot of problems that you think a person might face, but it might actually not be the same case. The user might not be facing that problem, or he may be facing, or he or she may be facing a separate problem than that. It's still a problem, but the way it affects them is a little different. So you need to look at the problem from their perspective. So that is empathizing with the person, which means that you have to put yourself in the shoes of the user and understand how the problem would affect you. Right? Understood? Yeah. And then once you do that, you also have to look at, is the problem actually worth solving? There are a lot of problems in the world. It's up to you. That's what it's subjective. It's up to you whether you find the problem worth solving or not. It may be very trivial to you. It may be a big problem for another person. The next stage for product development is then research. So this is another misconception that you need to start researching only in the market development phase, which is wrong. You need to do your research work twice. One is before you ideate on the problem, and one is market research stage. So when you look at research from at this stage, you need to first see how many people are facing that problem. You need to see the problem that it might be that just one or two people are facing that problem. So you need to research and see if a substantial amount of people are facing that problem, which would bring us to the point again, is the problem worth solving? So in that case, if a lot of people are facing that problem, it's not subjective. It is a fact that a lot of people are facing the problem. So it is a big problem. And then how does the problem affect them? You need to see there's a lot of diversity in every sort of demographic segment in the society. And you need to see how the problem affects each segment individually before you even ideate the solution. And then you need to look at any pre-existing solutions that might exist in the market and the people are using the solution. And then you need to look at the demographics of the target audience. So the demographics usually includes what kind of background are they from, a middle class background or a lower income background or high income background. Then you need to look at the cultural significance of the demography and a lot of other things it's a very vast topic. I don't want to delve into it too much. So that is for the research phase. The best way to research is through the internet, of course, but also interacting with people. Throughout the product development phase, interacting with people will be your best friend as a thumb of rule. So the next stage is then ideation. The design thinking is generally implemented at this phase ideally. Design thinking is a vast process. I'll explain that later. But usually, if ideally you use the correct design thinking approaches in the ideation phase, then you don't need to spend a lot of resources in the later stages, right? So continuing with the ideation phase, when you're ideating on the problem, once you've identified the problem, you need to first evaluate whether it is a unique solution. So this stems from the previous fact, any pre-existing solution. So once you've done the research for that, you know whether your solution is unique or not, because once it's not unique, it's not an innovation, it's a changed business model. So that is a big difference. And then you need to evaluate how effective the solution is to the problem. So that is also by interacting with the users. That will be done in the next phase also. Then you need to look at how simple the solution is. This is the primary objective of design thinking, a good design thinking approach. You will get to know about this in the later slides when you talk about design thinking. Then you need to see how easily understandable your solution is. If you have a very complex solution, no one is going to use it. So moving on, next stage is the prototyping stage. Once you ideated your design, your solution, you need to start prototyping the solution to build a proof of concept, what we call as the POC. This is very important if you go to hackathons or apply for the MIC, Ministry Innovation Council competitions. You always need to have a proof of concept with you. It doesn't have to be the final product, but just demonstrating the how your product works. So the prototyping stage is purely technical. The first stage of prototyping is 3D modeling. So because you don't need to, once you 3D model your design, you have a visual representative of how the design would work and how the design would look. So, and without spending a lot of resources, mostly. So these three are the main 3D model prototyping processes. The first one is a cardboard or thermoball protocol, which is the cheapest, and this is the one I've used in a lot of my projects. The easiest available and the easiest to build also. Then next is the sculpting. So this is not done, sculpting is not done mostly in technical projects when you use a lot of machinery or mechanisms or electronics. This is more done when you have a purely sculpting kind of a product like furniture. So except instead of building the entire product final from the costly material, might be costly, might be cheap, you can build it out of a wooden or a POP structure. So you get a visual representative of how the product looks. And then next is the 3D modeling. So this is, or CAD tools. This is also very useful. This is a useful tool that every engineer, I think, should know. Or at least if you're going in a hackathon team or you're working on a project, not just hackathons, if you're working on an industrial project or a real life project, you should always have someone who knows 3D modeling and CAD softwares in your team. So once you've developed your CAD software, you can always go for 3D printing. 3D printing is a very good tool, very flexible and versatile tool for prototyping. Moving on, these are the 3 stages of prototyping that you should ideally do. So the first one is called a looks like prototype. This is not, I should say, it's not, I shouldn't say that it is hierarchical or the stages are, each stage is the next stage of a previous stage. I should say that each stage, multiple teams can work on a single stage. So for example, a looks like prototype is a prototype where the product is just a visual representative of how the final product would look, but it doesn't work the same way. So sculpting is an example, and 3D modeling is also an example without the machinery. The works like prototype is not the visual representative. It is just the machinery, the circuitry of the bare bone circuitry of the product. And this is the test like prototype or feels like prototype, which is a combination of the looks like prototype and the works like prototype. So this is called a test like prototype because you combine the works like prototype and the looks like prototype to go for the final stages of the testing. So I was saying that these are not previous stages of a next stage or something. Why I said that is because the looks like prototype uses a certain skill. The works like prototype uses a certain skill. So the looks like prototype, for example, if I'm building this, this is a F1 racing steering console. So my looks like prototype would be just a 3D model of this, and it would use a skill like I explained that you should always have a CAD software designer in your team. So that person would be responsible for the looks like prototype, and you would be responsible for the works like prototype if you are a purely technical person. So both of you can work at the same time simultaneously, and then you would have the final test like prototype, where you test the final, not the final product, but the prototype. Moving on, I hope this is clear. Anyone has a doubt in this? No one? All right. You can also collect your doubts and ask at the end in the question answer round. So this is an example of a looks like prototype and the works like prototype. So this below the watch is a development board, looks like a Arduino MKR, not sure, attached to the wrist through the wires. So this is not how your product would look, the final product would look, but this is an accurate representation of how your product would work. So that is what a works like prototype is. And then there is the looks like prototype of this watch, where it doesn't work, it just has a fixed display and it looks like the final prototype. So you combine that and you get the final product. This is another example of the prototypes. So this is a water bottle vending machine. And the first one is the looks like prototype, where you just have the representation of how the final product would look, which has the branding, graphics, and everything else. Not just branding and graphics, also the ergonomics of the design. This is the works like prototype. It's just a thermocol or cardboard or plywood casing, and there's a machinery inside that would be the final machinery, or you can iterate it to get the final machinery. And then there is a feels like prototype when you do testing. Also, testing is not only mechanical testing or technical testing. It is also important to test with the users before you make the final product, because they are no matter how much you empathize, they will tell you what the exact thing is. So the user is like your god. So whenever you make a product, you should always consult with the user. For example, if there is a simple feature that I need to add, and I think that would solve the problem for the user, I should not make any assumptions that the feature would actually work. I should always go to the user and ask them if the feature would actually work, because ultimately they're going to use it, they know better. So yeah, the feels like prototype is also the experience and the impression of the product. So moving on, this is a very good company from design thinking perspective. I urge you to read about it, but I'll also explain a little about it, not in detail. What the design flaws were and how they solved it, I'll explain in the later slide. But this is how their design process worked. So this is the works like prototype, where they didn't have the casing or anything else. So I should also tell you that TipJar is basically a company that produces tipping machines, where you just have to insert your credit card and $1 or ₹1 would be subtracted from your account as a tip, because people don't use change nowadays, especially in the United States. People use credit cards more than they use coins. So that really affected how the restaurant managers and the waiters are getting tipped. Not the manager doesn't get tipped, I mean the waiters. So this is the works like prototype, where it just has the bare bones machinery, and this is the looks like prototype, which doesn't have the machinery, it just has the casing and how it will look. Why this is necessary is will be a little clear to you when I explain the design flaw that came with this product. And also why you should always have these two stages separate is because once you have one iteration of the works like prototype, and you develop a looks like prototype casing for it and convert it into a final product, a proof of concept product. And then you realize that there's a change that needs to be done in this hardware, and you need to add another big IC or another component like an antenna onto it. Then you have to spend additional resources to go back to this stage and then build another case. So it's always better to keep these two separate. Moving on. So the entire prototyping phase can be categorized into two categories based on fidelity. One is the low fidelity representation, and one is the high fidelity representation. The low fidelity representation usually involves the looks like prototype, where you have the sketch and the wireframe. A wireframe is basically a stick figure of sorts for a product with sticks and all. And then the high fidelity representation would involve the mockup, which is the amalgamation of the looks like prototype and the works like prototype, and then you get a final prototype. So broadly, you can classify this the looks like prototype as the low fidelity stage and the works like prototype as the high fidelity stage. All right, so once you're done with prototyping, you need to, and have a proof of concept ready with you, you need to start with this stage, which is the validation stage. You need to go to the users, you need to interact with at least 50 users, depending upon your demographics. Demographics also includes here the number of people, number of users that you will be having. So depending on that, you need to have basically a substantial amount of people that you can get validation from. So for example, take any product. Take an IoT product, for example. I have a smart home sensor, a smoke sensor, let's say a smoke sensor. So I need to go to the user and I need to show that person the sensor, and I need to explain to the user how the sensor would work and how it would be beneficial for them. And then they will tell you how it will not be beneficial for them. So that is one thing you need to take care of. They'll basically tell you what changes you can do. You also, from experience, users are not always honest. You need to plan this stage very strategically. That would be done only with experience. No one can tell you how to do that. All right. Once you've validated your prototype, proof of concept, and now you know that your product will actually work, so you go to the market research phase, where you identify the first group of people or segment of the user base that would accept the product and buy the product first. So those people are called the early adopters. Just random bits of information, not related to design thinking, but so you need to identify your early adopters, and you need to develop a market strategy on how you will start marketing your product. So that involves the next stage. So this is kind of a broad gray area between market strategy and business development. So business development broadly is just the business model that you'll be developing. So if you want to look at how to develop a good business model, you should read the Lean Startup book by Eric Rice. This is a very good book, and it will tell you about the Lean Startup revolution. And if you don't want to read the entire book, you can just search Lean Canvas. It's a very useful tool. All right, moving on. All right, so once you know what the product development is, now we can start talking about what design thinking is and how it is different from product development. Anyone knows what design thinking is? Anyone who's read about it before? Anyone? So design thinking is just sort of a way of thinking, a way of approach that based on purely common sense and a broader sense of perspective that you need to look at the product with when you're making any product. In the ideation phase first, of course. But so at this point, I should also tell you that all these steps that I told you about product development, they're not necessarily chronological. So you might already have a product that you built during a hackathon. Then you can go back to you go back to research, go back to problem, then you can look at how that is when your product doesn't work. When the users are not accepting your product, then you can go back to the problem, going back to the basics basically. So you can go back to the problem, look at what the problem they're facing, use these steps, then you can go to the research. So it's not really a chronological also. So design thinking is very specifically how the product works, what the product is, how the product works, how efficiently the product works, how easily the user can accept the product, how the minimum effort that the user needs to put in order to start using the product. So for example, you get a product in your hand, you order it from Amazon, you open it up, I would suggest you open the cover out before entering the house and throw the cover outside because of coronavirus. But moving on. So you get the product at home, then you look at the product and you should immediately start working with the product. You should immediately grasp what the product is, and without referring much to the user manuals. That is a good design. Obviously, that is not possible in a lot of technical products, but broadly speaking, that is a good design. Even for technology, you can do that. And it is also the nature of interaction between the product and the user. So bad designs are actually everywhere. You may or may not notice it, but once you start noticing, you can't unsee it. Like that meme, you can't unsee the whatever. So once you start looking, bad designs are actually everywhere. So I'll show you a couple of examples to help you understand what bad design is. Because once you understand what a bad design is, you can start understanding what a good design is. So this is one example of a bad design. It's not necessarily a bad design, but it turned out to be a bad design. The designers were very good, but they didn't look at this perspective. So when you want to attach a USB into a female USB port, you have to struggle because you don't know the orientation. So for example, you see this blue dot and this blue bar and this blue bar here. So these are meant to fit each other, and each of them have ports that connect to each other, but they have an indication. So when you try to attach a USB port, you have to rotate it a couple of times to make it fit perfectly. Am I right? So the designer actually thought of this problem and they developed a solution for it, and it exists, but it doesn't work. So if you see this small USB symbol on the top of the cable, that is a signifier of where that signifies that this part needs to be, the surface needs to be at the top of the attachment. So you attach it like that. You keep this at the top and then you attach it, but it doesn't work in chargers because it's not fixed. This part is not fixed. In laptops, this is fixed because this is the top and this is the bottom, even for this. But when you look at chargers, the USB chargers, they symmetrical. They don't have a top and a bottom. So that is where you mostly struggle. And that is one way this design actually failed. It's a good design, but turned out to be a bad design. Or this is a very interesting example. If you have ever looked at doors and you've tried to open a door, only to notice that you opened it the wrong way. Even though intuitively you opened it the right way, it turned out that there was a carpet blocking your way or something like that, or a stopper blocking your way. Has this ever happened to anyone?
Both part.
Yeah. So this is this is a very big design flaw, and these are called Norman doors, based on the author of the book that I very likely read. The person is called Don Norman. So he wrote the book and got into product development because he was facing this problem, and he faced this problem a lot. So I'll just show you a video of the Norman door.
Hi guys, so we're at my office right now, and so what I want to talk about with my Hall of Fame, Hall of Shame is this Norman door right here, which seems pretty straightforward. You know, door has two functions, to open and to close. So this is a vertical handle, and I suppose this vertical handle is a signifier that shows, you know, how this door is supposed to be operated. And so we walk up and we push, and we're inside the conference room. Oh, again. Okay, and the problem is on this side, we have the exact same door handle, the same vertical bar, which has led me very many times to be confused, and I accidentally push on this door handle, and I look like an idiot in front of my coworkers. This door is supposed to be pulled, and there's that like blocker right up there, but it's a Norman door, and it's a pretty bad example of software design, or just design.
Got it? As I mentioned. So that is a very good example of bad design. Now the question comes, how can we solve this? So intuitively, when you see a handle, you think that it's supposed to be pulled. So instead of keeping handles on both sides, you can also keep a small rectangular tab that doesn't allow you to pull it. You can only push it. So that is a simple solution that should be implemented in doors, but it's not. And on the other side, where you have to pull the handle, you can have these bars to enable you to pull the handles. This is, while I was downloading this video, I also found this very interesting design flaw in a website. This has more to do with the user interface, UI, UX perspective of websites. Intuitively, when you say this, so this is basically to select between a video and an MP3 download. So when I click the video, the video tab turns black and the MP3 tab turns white. And conversely, when I click on the MP3 tab, the video tab becomes white, which is counterintuitive. Because now look at this image. I don't know whether it's MP3 selected or it's video selected. Of course, you can look at this MP3, MP4 format, and then you can know that it is a video tab. But then again, a good design is when you intuitively understand and you do the right thing at the first instant. So this is another example of bad UX design. So what could have been done is, I think this is what Google recommends you to do in dark themes, is that if you have multiple tabs in dark theme, the tab that you've selected should be a lighter shade of gray or black than the other tabs, and it gradually decreases to a darker tone, so that you intuitively know that that tab is selected. Because of shadows, because when you perceive shadows, the one nearest to you is the brightest and the one furthest to you is darkest. So that is another interesting take on UI UX. This is a very good example. It might not have happened to you, but it has happened to a significant amount of people in the United States. So this is a normal cup noodles cup. So this is very hot. And you see that this is like a normal glass, it's tapering at the bottom and it is wider at the top. So because of that, the center of mass of this entire cup shifts to the top, which makes it easier to topple. And once hot water topples, then you have serious burns. So a lot of people have not faced this problem, but the ones who have faced this problem know that it is a bad design. They understand it from the depth of their heart that this is a bad design. Moving on, this is a cup holder in a car. So how this is a bad design is, if a lot of cars have this cup holder fixed, so you can't remove it, and it gets dirty very soon. You may not have faced this problem, but it has crumbs, it has liquid, it's a mushy thing, it's very hard to clean, and you can't take it out, so it's perpetually there. So a simple solution to that is that you can have detachable cup holders. You can take it out, you can clean it with multiple tools or with your hand, if your hand is flexible, and then you can put it back. So that is another design flaw, which I believe is corrected in most cars. And this is a classical case of bad design, which wasn't intended to be so, but it is so. This is also the cover of the book I was talking about. This is called a Nana pot. So intuitively we are, so this is again goes back to culture. We are used to having this spout of a jug or a kettle to pour liquid out of the jug. In this product, it is actually counterintuitive. What you have to do to get the liquid out is take the top off and then pour the liquid. And this spout is actually there to dissipate the steam. So if you don't know, if you're used to using the normal kettles, it's going to burn your hand. Moving on. So the question is, how do you create good designs? This is a very interesting question if you look at it. So the first thing that you need to take care of while creating a good design is that you do not just look at one aspect of the problem, but you look at a broader picture. So when you look at a broader picture, you get a sense of what could the solution be to make it a good design. And then you have to empathize again. Empathizing is a very important aspect if you're creating a product, which might not be very intuitive to you. And you have to put extra effort in trying to understand, stepping into another person's shoes and trying to understand how the person is facing the problem. And then you have to question the obvious. This is a very important thing when you study product design, because the very first example I told you of the glasses, the problem was very obvious, but we didn't guess it at the first go, because we're not used to questioning the obvious. So when you're looking at a good design or a bad design, you always have to look at, you also always have to question the obvious. You have to ask the right questions, and even if it is intuitive to you, you still have to question it and try to think from that perspective. So there are a lot of design studies that exist, and that is all design. It's all a part of design thinking, but it changed a lot based on the field of application that it's applied to. For example, industrial design. So empathizing with the customer or the user doesn't work in industrial design, because what you need in industrial design is optimization and function-centered design. So all you need to do is you need to optimize the product. So if you have an aircraft, you need to have minimum drag as possible and as good lift as possible. So you don't need to look at how the user will use the product. So aircrafts are fairly complex. The pilots have to get used to it. And then you also need to look at design benefits to both the manufacturer and the user. Manufacturer the design should also benefit the manufacturer, because it's easy to assemble. It facilitates a larger amount of assembly line, a bigger assembly line to produce more product. Then there is interaction design. So interaction design is mainly how the user interacts with technology. So for example, I'm using my phone. Is that if I'm using an app, or I'm developing an app, I need to look at how the user will interact with that app, and how easy is it for the user to grasp that app, and understand how it works, understand how to use the app, and use it efficiently. So this interaction design is mostly used in UI UX design when you talk about Android development or website development. And a good design is obviously an enjoyable experience, but a bad design, a bad website, a bad app is always very frustrating. And then there is experience design. So this is what I'm interested in mostly. So the experience design is based on the design of a product, based on how the user would experience, how the user would use the product, and how the experience for the user would be. So optimization and so that being said, let's get a little geeky with design. Let's look at a little bookish knowledge about design thinking. So there are a lot of aspects to help you evaluate design, and this also helps you look at the broader picture that I was talking about. When you have certain factors or aspects that you have written in the book that you can follow, it's easier to look at the broader picture. So the first aspect is discoverability. So discoverability is basically the ease of figuring out the purpose of a product and how it is intended to be used. So for example, I have a door. We were talking about Norman doors. I have a Norman door, and the discoverability of a door is basically the ease of for me to understand what the door is meant for, whether it is meant for passing through, whether it is a window pane, because mostly you have glass doors. So you need to have a certain discoverability factor for the person to know whether it is actually a window pane or a glass door. And you also need to intuitively tell the user how the door is meant to be used, which was a big failure in the Norman doors. I hope you understand that. The next aspect is affordances. This is actually very interesting, and this is again questioning the obvious. And so you see a cylinder here, a man is pushing a cylinder, a person is pushing a cylinder. So affordances basically pertains to how many ways can a product be used, how many usages of the product can it afford. So for example, the cylinder can be rolled because of its curved surface. So that is one affordance. It has the next affordance is that it has a hollow chamber inside it, so the person can hide it or you can store things in it, which is the case with glasses. So that is another affordance. Then another affordance is that it has height, and you can stand on it, or it rolls, so you can use it as a hamster wheel of sorts. So I hope you can understand what affordances are. Does anyone have a question in affordances? No one? I hope it's clear. Also, please note down all the questions that you are getting if you don't want to ask them now. Maybe they'll clear your doubts in the next subsequent slides, but you should ask those questions and at the end of the session in the question answer round. So let's discuss some examples for affordances. For example, let's take a water bottle. So let's count the number of affordances that it has. Again, it is a cylinder, so it can roll. That is one affordance. It's a hollow cylinder, so we can store stuff in that. That is another affordance, and that is the main usage of the affordance that we use in water bottles. And then the other affordance is that you can not only hold the water inside the bottle, but you can also prevent it from getting out because it's a block path. So that is the third affordance. And if you really want to look at the broader picture, this affordance is a little redundant, but maybe even useful, is that it's thinner. It's a cylinder, it's tall, but the width is very less. So what that affords is that you can store multiple bottles in the same place. So that is one way to look at it. That is one affordance that enables you to store multiple bottles at the same place. If you stored water in a tiffin box, you wouldn't be able to store a lot of water in the same space as a water bottle, a cylindrical water bottle. Then let's look at glass panes and a concept called anti-affordance. So you've all seen this. This might be a very funny picture, but you've all seen this. I hope you have. It's a very nice sight. It doesn't harm the bird, I hope. So what happens is a bird comes, it looks at its reflection in the glass, and then it crashes into it because it doesn't know that there's a barrier in front of it. So it keeps going because it sees a reflection of the environment that is around the bird. So so an affordance is basically what the product or an object can afford, or how it can be used. An anti-affordance, conversely, is how it cannot be used. So it's a complete opposite of affordance. And why it is important, anti-affordance is important, is because if you look at this glass pane, first let's look at the affordances of this glass pane. One is that it is reflective. That is what causes the bird to crash into it. And one is that it is opaque, which is the anti-affordance. Also, this is a very interesting topic point, that the one feature of a product might be an affordance for another user and an anti-affordance for another user. For example, the opacity, the hardness, or the feature that doesn't let you pass through the glass pane might be an affordance for us as humans, because it doesn't allow the heat from the outside environment to come into the house. But it is an anti-affordance for a bird, because it doesn't know that the glass pane is the bird cannot cross through the glass pane, and which plays with the affordance that it can see the reflection of the surroundings, and it crashes into it because of the anti-affordance that can't pass through it. I might have made it a little complicated. I hope you all understand this. Please come back to this if you don't understand in the questionnaires around, but it's actually very interesting. So the next aspect of understanding product design is signifiers. Yeah, so signifiers are basically labels or instructions that tell you that a product is supposed to be used a certain way. So it signifies the usage of the product. So as a good signifier is playing into the factor that it makes it more discoverable and understandable. So if you look at this car key, you have two buttons, and the buttons can be pressed. So that pressing of the button is an affordance which can be used by the technical guys to use that to click to activate a signal in the car to unlock the doors. And the icons on the button signify what the button is meant for. So you usually have two buttons. One is to unlock the door and one is to lock the door. So if you don't have signifiers, you don't know which one locks and which one doesn't. So that is why signifiers play an important role. Of course, if you get used to it a lot, you know which button is which. If you don't have signifiers and you use it for a prolonged amount of time, you know that the top button is for locking the door and the bottom button is for unlocking the door. But that is another concept called habituation, which I'll come to later. So that is the importance of signifiers. So looking at Norman doors, again from the perspective of signifiers, you have these doors where you have it in the next slide now. So you have these doors where you have indications whether you need to pull the handle or not, or you have to push the handle. So that is another signifier. But I personally like to avoid to use signifiers as much as I can, because it plays into the aesthetics of minimalism. If you want to read minimalism, it's a very important, interesting topic, especially from a design thinking perspective. So this is another example of signifiers, a regulator, fan regulator, which tells you which the position of the dial and what the dial signifies, whether it is off, whether it is a speed 1 or speed 5, and it also indicates you how much you have to turn the knob to get the right speed for the fan. So that is another signifier. Again, if you look at habituation, I'll come to that later, but still, if you don't have signifiers, you need to get used to the product, which is a bad design in my perspective. So moving on, MOSFETs, this is very relevant to us as engineering students, especially from the ECE branches if you're there. So this is not necessarily a MOSFET IC, but MOSFET ICs and then 7805 voltage regulator ICs. So there is a very major design flaw with this, that you don't know which junction is which. You don't know which is the collector, which is the emitter, which is the base for the transistor, and which is the drain, source, and gate for the MOSFET. So you always have to go back to the data sheet and you have to look कि अच्छा ये right side से ये वाला pin ये है, left side से ये वाला pin ये है. So instead of that, if you just had an E here or a B here or something like that, it wouldn't be much of an effort for the manufacturer, because you just have to print it like you printed the details of the IC model and all that. You just need to print that, and that would solve a lot of problems, isn't it? Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it has a greater purpose, but from a design thinking perspective, that is the case. So there are these things called accidental signifiers. So if you look at a toothpaste tube and the cap of a toothpaste tube, to be very specific, there are serrations, there are lines that help you grip the cap and then rotate it. So that is an affordance if you look at it from the affordances perspective, because it lets you do something, it lets you perform something. But it is also a signifier. It's not meant to be a signifier, but it is a signifier because whenever you see these serrations or markings on a cap, you know intuitively that it is meant to be rotated. So accidental signifiers are also very interesting to read. And so that accidental signifiers are also, if you can manipulate your design into incorporating accidental signifiers, it is very useful to use when you are looking into minimalistic designs, because then you don't need a signifier to signify that it needs to be rotated. I am sure this is very intuitive and very common, more like common sense to you, but it's very interesting to look at. All right, the next aspect is feedback. So when you're looking at any design and you perform a function and you're waiting for a response, and if you don't get that response, you don't know whether the function you are trying to perform is actually performed or not. So that is where feedback comes into play. So for example, these are traffic lights in the United States and other European countries and foreign countries, where these are mostly there on traffic lights near zebra crossings, and you press the button as a pedestrian, you press the button when you want to cross the road. And when you press the button, the signal changes after some time to red so that you can cross the road. But when you press the button, you don't know, in this specific design, you don't know, if you don't have a feedback system, you don't know whether the system has registered your request or not. So you keep pressing the button and you don't know whether it's working or not. So this is how they solve it. It's a very simple solution. You just add a couple of LEDs, or even one single LED would do that. When you press the button, the LED glows, and you know that the system has accepted your response. And this is also the case in most lift buttons, where if you press the button, it gets backlit to a specific color. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't know whether the lift is coming down or not. Of course, you can look at the display, which indicates which floor it is, but you'll at least know that the system has accepted your response. So I was talking about habituation. So habituation is when you develop a certain habit with a product. So that can be either good or bad. Habituation can be manipulated by good design thinkers, and it can be used by them to develop a product that plays on the habits of a user. For example, if I have a specific problem and I know that the user has a habit of doing this, so instead of so to make it more discoverable, I play on that habit of the user and then make the design according to that. So I don't need to put extra signifiers or extra manuals that need to tell the user what they need to do in order to use the product. And conversely, and the negative side is that in a bad design, I would classify a design as a bad design if you have to get used to using it. Initially, initially you don't know how to use it because it doesn't have the discoverability or the understandability, and doesn't have any signifiers, or it is too complex. But then you start using it and then you get used to it. So that is, I would say, that is a bad design. So for example, we talked about the car key buttons. So if you have to use it for a couple of times and then you have to realize or know or build a habit of which button is which, then that is a bad design, because it doesn't tell you of the packaging that it needs to be used a certain way. And another example of bad habituation, is driving. There's not much you can do about it as of now. Of course, you can develop solutions. So when you start driving, it's very difficult because there are a lot of factors that you need to look at. You need to look at gauges, you need to look at the speedometer, you need to look at the clutch, the pedal, if you're using the stick transmission. You need to look at the fuel, you need to look at stop signs, traffic, pedestrians, crossings, everything else, and even animals on the road. So it takes some time to get used to it. If you know driving, you might know what I'm talking about. But then you get used to all the different aspects of driving, and then you're very fluently driving. So from a design thinking perspective, everything has a solution, but you need to get it first. So everything has a solution until you have the solution. So this might be solved in the future. Who knows? Someone might come up with the solution for this. So that is the design thinking for you. I wanted to include a lot more, but the talk would have gone for at least 2-3 hours. So I would urge you to read this book. I'll just put it in the comment section if I can put the PDF there, if it allows me to do that. And please read it once if you're interested. If I'm successful today in inciting some curiosity about design thinking in your mind.
I thank our speaker to share his wonderful thoughts with us, and I really appreciate you all for being such a decent audience. With this, we end our today's session. Please like and share our videos, subscribe our channel and hit the bell icon for more updates. Thank you.